The following is an argumentative video meant to prove to a high degree of certainty that certain events will come to pass 2 years from now. I will begin by showing you my exhaustive list of references to prove to you my level of familiarity and knowledge of the patterns of the past, that you may with stronger conviction believe what I believe, see what I see, and understand what I understand. It is my hope that as we glide through the process of using these patterns to predict Elsa and Anna's future, you will be positively edified and empowered to perceive clearly the literary and psychological techniques employed in the modern-day films we all know and love. Please allow me to introduce my top 8 most logical and informed predictions for Walt Disney Animation Studios' Frozen 2. Prediction 1. Elsa and Anna will leave Arendelle early in the movie. Prediction 2. The characters will make a lot of really dumb decisions. Prediction 3. Elsa will sing a song early on resembling Let It Go on a calmer note. Prediction 4. Pabbie has ice powers too. Prediction 5. A villain with a frozen heart. Prediction 6. The villain will force Elsa to harm those she loves. Prediction 7. The movie will begin by introducing the villain. Prediction 8. Hans will be redeemed. Prediction 1. Elsa and Anna will leave Arendelle early in the movie. Shrek 2, How to Train Your Dragon 2, Cars 2, Toy Story 2, Despicable Me 2, Alvin and the Chipmunks 2, Night at the Museum 2, Mulan 2, Pocahontas 2, Kung Fu Panda 2, Madagascar 2. These are all your most popular animated movie sequels from Pixar, DreamWorks, 20th Century Fox, Disney, and Illumination. And what do they all have in common? The first installment took place at a central location, Burke, Radiator Springs, Andy's house, but for the sequel they set out on some kind of adventure elsewhere. They leave home for their second battle adventure movie. Because the original sets and places are not interesting enough to house a successful sequel, the story needs to move somewhere else. The characters need to interact with new environments so that new aspects of their personalities can be realized. This is a pattern repeated in nearly every other film of Frozen 2's kind, a pattern that this sequel will very likely repeat if it wants to be successful and interesting. So goodbye for now, Arendelle. Looks like Elsa and Anna will be going to sea for this movie. Prediction 2. The characters will make a lot of really dumb decisions. Much of Frozen's insane popularity can be traced to the relatability of his characters. Why are these characters so much more relatable than those in other franchises? Because they make stupid mistakes. Consider the king's decision to hide Elsa, Elsa's decision to stay in the mountains for the rest of her life, Anna's decision to marry someone she just met, and Kristoff's decision to leave Anna when she was sick. These characters seem so authentic and real because they make so many human mistakes. Look at Tangled. Most agree that its plot was written much better than Frozen's, but the characters don't make human mistakes. Rapunzel is a picture-perfect Disney princess without any flaws. Eugene needs to turn from his criminal ways, but he doesn't do anything that's blatantly stupid and human, so they don't stand up to the authenticity test. They don't act like real human characters. Tangled was written with masterful storytelling, had many great moments of humor, love, hate, sacrifice, and joy that were missing from Frozen. But it didn't have realistic characters, and it didn't do nearly as well on the market as a result. So if Disney wants to relive the monstrous box office victory they got for Frozen 1, they will certainly maintain this level of character authenticity in the sequel. So it looks like Elsa and Anna still have plenty of mistakes to make, dumb problems to fix, and simple lessons to learn. Prediction 3. Elsa will sing a song early on resembling Let It Go on a calmer note. This is far from guaranteed, but there is a decent chance you could see a reprise of Let It Go early in Frozen 2. We as an audience are not aware of what's going on in Elsa's head, and Elsa is far from having defeated all her demons. And Disney won't want us to forget Elsa and Anna's painful past. At the end of Frozen 1, Elsa's attitude towards literally everyone has completely changed. Overnight. And next to no one bought it. Because that doesn't happen in real life. In real life, people take time to change like that. So for us to truly accept that Elsa has genuinely changed and has a stable foundation upon which to fight her next battle, she must return to where she was weakest and most comfortable, and rise above it with her newfound determination to be available and courageous. She's learned to let go of conceal no fear, but has she truly learned to let go of fear and isolation? Many fans have thought that such a reprise belongs after or before the climax of Frozen 1, but realistically, such an idea is simply ridiculous. It just won't work. It would take too much away from the climax. That's bad storytelling. But put the reprise in the rising action of Frozen 2 and it would work beautifully. Prediction 4. Pabbie has ice powers too. Doesn't everyone have a ton of questions about Pabbie the troll scenes? Like, how does he have magic? And why was his behavior so different from the other trolls? And how did he know so much about Elsa's powers? Let's fast forward 50 years into Elsa's future. What would her life look like? Well, she would probably be revered by her people. She would have thorough knowledge of how to deal with her ice powers. She would be very wise, and most importantly, her powers will have transformed and grown immensely. In just 11 years, she went from creating inanimate snowmen to creating life by accident. It can be assumed that she will, over the course of her life, develop other new abilities that don't necessarily have to do with snow and ice. Now let's go back to Pabbie. Pabbie is revered by his people, he has thorough knowledge of how to deal with ice powers. He seems to have wisdom, and he has powers that resemble ice powers but do appear different. Powers that are exactly like what Elsa's powers could easily develop into over the course of a lifetime. If she could create life, why can't she manipulate memories a little further down the road? And the screenplay claims that Pabbie's video display thing in the air was projected via the northern lights. If Elsa can manipulate rain, ice, snow, and wind, why can't she learn to manipulate the northern lights as well? And if Pabbie can manipulate memories in the northern lights, why can't he manipulate wind and ice? Why can't he create life? Is it easier to believe that Pabbie has his own weird mind and northern lights powers that are limited to what we saw in his two very brief scenes? Or is it easier to connect the dots and realize that all our questions can be answered by accepting a now obvious logical possibility? Prediction 5. A villain with a frozen heart. Remember that weird song the Ice Harvesters sung at the very beginning of the movie? Here's some of the lyrics.
So cut through the heart, cold and clear, strike for love and strike for fear, seed of beauty sharp and clear, split the ice apart and break the frozen heart.
Cut through the heart, cold and clear, strike for love and strike for fear, see the beauty sharp and sheer, split the ice apart and break the frozen heart. Tell me, when in Frozen 1 did we see anyone striking at a frozen heart? When did anyone need to break a frozen heart? Instead, when the idea of a frozen heart came up, the solution the movie always gave was to thaw it, never to harm it further. Most people believe that these lyrics foreshadow how to save Anna and how to control Elsa's powers, but that only makes sense if you force it to. If someone were to tell me to cut, strike, and break something, I would conclude that there was something that needed to be destroyed. What does this have to do with controlling fear and ice powers? If you've done your research on Frozen's story development, you would know that in the early drafts of the script, the whole story revolved around a prophecy that warned of some evil ice queen with the frozen heart.
In a lot of the early versions, the film had this prophecy, and it was our job to introduce the prophecy in a fun and exciting song.
And we all made the assumption that the prophecy was cut and never made it to the screen. But what do you call a song or poem that foreshadows the future? A prophecy. And what does Frozen 1 open with? A song that foreshadows the future. A prophecy. Looks like that prophecy in the early drafts may have made it to the film after all. Is it more likely that a bunch of ice harvesters in the mountains would sing an ancient prophecy about an evil ice queen with a frozen heart? Or is it more likely they would sing a song about Princess Elsa who has secret ice powers? I'd say the former, because the second just doesn't make a lot of sense unless you need it to. Now, read the song lyrics over again with this in mind. Don't they make so much more sense now? You cannot deny that those lyrics instruct someone to cut, strike, and break a frozen heart. It's right there in black and white, so the lyrics must be talking about someone not yet introduced. And this clears up not only the meaning of that song, but also one of the biggest confusions in the entire movie. Why were Elsa and her parents so ridiculously paranoid? I mean, okay, she has magic ice powers. That's cool. I might think you're weird and might be afraid of you, but I'm not going to think you're a monster. I'm not going to hunt you down and kill you. So why are you so insanely scared of people finding out? Well, what if there was this ancient prophecy about an evil ice queen with a frozen heart in the back of everyone's minds? Then I might suspect that you're dangerous, Elsa. I mean, if you have ice powers, you must be the ice queen whose heart was supposed to cut, strike, and break. So maybe I should regard you as a monster and hunt you down accordingly. If I were Elsa and knew this prophecy was in the back of everyone's minds, I would be terrified too. I would probably act the same way. Question finally answered, and by a completely rational explanation backed by the film's history. Prediction 6. The villain will force Elsa to harm those she loves. Frozen 1 produced many moments that made you genuinely feel deep grief and sorrow. In order to predict how Disney will make us feel that again on a greater level in Frozen 2, we must understand what powered those moments in the original. While Anna certainly felt frustration and grief throughout the movie, the real powerhouse of the movie's grief came from Elsa's tricky position. She wants to love Anna like a sister, but can't make that move because doing so could kill both Anna and herself. She's pinned, as a chess player would put it. She wants to defend an attack on her queen, no pun intended, but doing so would expose her king to a direct attack, which could cost her the game, Anna's life and her own life. So she's forced to sit silently on the other side of the door, doing nothing while her queen, her second most valuable piece, second to the king, is being destroyed just on the other side of the door. This concept is what powered all the grief and frustration between the sisters in the first film. If this system could be replicated by an original plotline for Frozen 2, Disney would be well on its way towards writing a sequel worthy of its predecessor. What might this original plotline look like? Well, in the original, Elsa's fear of her subjects and her lack of control kept her pinned. But by introducing a villain, wouldn't her fear switch to the villain, at first at least? Isn't that what the villain's function is in the story? The next question would ask how this villain could squeeze the most grief out of the protagonist as possible. Well, we already know what Elsa cares about most, Anna, so the villain should use that relationship against her, right? Maybe by forcing them to hurt each other? How would this villain be able to carry this out? Well, where is Elsa most weak? Where is she most vulnerable to psychological attack? What's her deepest desire that hasn't yet been filled? To be fully accepted and understood, right? That's where she's most vulnerable. If the villain knows this weakness and how to exploit it, Disney will have a true villain on its hands. For the greatest villains are those that can best exploit the hero's deepest weaknesses. Look at Christopher Nolan's Joker, for example, one of the greatest villains of all time. And who would be most qualified to serve as Elsa's villain? Who would best understand her desires and what she goes through? Who would be best at manipulating her mind? Someone else with ice powers, of course. Someone like the evil Ice Queen with the frozen heart who is both foul and fair. And didn't I already establish this character as a villain by a completely different method? It all fits together, doesn't it? Sorry, Elsa, but your future is looking pretty bleak. Prediction 7. The movie will begin by introducing the villain. Frozen 1 began with a mood-setting prophecy song establishing the expansiveness of the film's theme. Frozen Fever started out with that happy-go-lucky scene remembering the past and reaffirming the future mood. What will Frozen 2 start out with? Another happy-go-lucky scene? This is very unlikely. You can only use one hook once. Otherwise, the fish will know to recognize it and will ignore it. And Frozen Fever already used that hook. Because every story needs an exposition and time of relative peace to start from, and because what should therefore be going on in Arendelle is too familiar, we should probably expect Disney to open again by introducing something we haven't seen before. Something or someone vital to the rest of the story. Someone like the villain with the frozen heart. What would this look like? Could we see possibly a reprise of Frozen Heart sung by the villain's
Prediction
minions?
1.
Prediction 2. Probably
Prediction
not.
3.
Disney's more
Prediction
clever
4.
than that. But we can expect it to be musical in their setting.
Prediction
One
7.
line of the prophecy of
Prediction
Frozen Heart
8.
in particular will
Prediction
have
9.
a dramatic effect on
Prediction
how this
10.
villain will be portrayed. This icy force, both foul and fair, has a frozen heart worth mining. For Frozen 2's villain to be effective in manipulating Elsa, he or she must first show a fair side. They must gain Elsa's trust, as well as the trust of the audience. Therefore, it is unlikely the villain will be directly introduced in an opening song establishing a villain. We can expect the song to instead foreshadow the villain much more directly than did Frozen Heart. Prediction 8. Hans will be redeemed. Perhaps the most confusing moment in the entirety of Frozen is the untimely transformation of Hans into the film's villain. While the vast majority of all villains throughout all forms of storytelling give hints of their true intentions well before they are revealed to be evil, Hans exhibited nothing but sincerity, while being watched and while being alone. This is what made a sudden change of heart so unbelievable. But the only reason this would confuse anyone is if they made an assumption to believe what doesn't make sense. But the second more likely assumption that can be made makes perfect sense. Why are people so inclined to believe that the Hans at the end of the film is telling the truth, while the Hans all the way up until that point was lying? During the scene where Hans betrays Anna, is there any reason for Hans to remain loving to Anna? The relationship between Anna and Hans was incredibly shallow. They'd only spent most an afternoon evening together, and many events had taken place afterwards, during which they were separated. So does Hans really have a good motive to remain loving to Anna? Not really. And during the same scene, is there any reason for Hans to become hostile to Anna? Hans has just realized that the only thing standing in his path to becoming a king is the princess whose name he barely knows. And she just told him that she is dying, and the only thing that can save her is his kiss of true love. Hans knows that he doesn't truly love her, and Anna in the back of her mind likely also knows this. So what would Hans be thinking when she demands that true love's kiss?
She froze my heart, and only an act of true love can save me.
Oh, shoot, gotta get out of here.
A true love's kiss.
And how exactly is he going to accomplish that gracefully? Well, if he kisses her, nothing is going to happen. He'll be blamed for lying to her, and he will thus lose his dignity and grace. He will walk out of that room totally ashamed of himself. No one wants to get caught red-handed. But he has to make an exit somehow. So how can he escape without making a fool of himself? He goes all out. He adds a big lie to a tiny truth and walks out of that room a victorious conqueror. And in his mind, it won't cost him a dime. So is Hans really evil? Aside from lying to and emotionally manipulating Elsa, no. He's just an excellent liar who has very low self-esteem, probably due to the fact that he's 13th in line. He just needed to make up a story to make himself feel better after being forced to admit that he didn't actually love his fiancée. Because Disney has officially confirmed that Hans will receive a redemption in Frozen 2, he will very likely attest to this. You can redeem the Hans who told the truth for 80% of the film and was forced to lie at the end, but you cannot redeem a Hans who is genuinely evil the whole way through. And those are my best 8 predictions for the upcoming film Frozen 2. If you like where I'm going with this, help me get to 1,000 thumbs up and I'll make another video outlining my idea for the plot once I develop it further.